Even if you can use NLP effectively, do you actually understand how it works? Because knowing how it works is what separates the masters from the practitioners. It's also how you're going to access your full potential. This will give you an advantage that few people in the world know how to leverage. Majority of what we do here in self-concept is very practical, and it's practices rather than theorizing, which is important because that's what NLP is primarily based on. There is room for theory, but I like to refer to NLP as very much like the type of yoga that I practice, which is Ashtanga yoga. And the man who didn't invent it, but brought it back from like maybe 1,000 years of the practice being lost, and he's now passed on, but he said that Ashtanga yoga is 99% practice and 1% theory. And I thought that was amazing. And if you practice Ashtanga, that's exactly what it is. It's mainly about the practice, and I don't really theorize or talk much about it or why it works. And I think that's actually beneficial. And I think when it comes to NLP, the same approach is going to be of most benefit to people. And that's where I started, which was to fill my time with as much practice as possible. The result of that was I got pretty good at NLP, and I could make it work. And I knew I could make it work rather predictably. The interesting thing is that I didn't know how it worked. And some people might find that strange, where they say, well, how could you make it work when you didn't fully understand it? And then I respond with that with, do you know how a car works? And most people don't. And then I say, well, how is it you can drive a car when you don't understand how the engine works? And then people understand what I mean. You don't need to understand how an engine works or be able to fix a car to be able to drive a car. So with NLP, we are all living our lives. We are all speaking a language. We are all doing tasks, and we have habits, and we're able to bring something to completion from start to finish. And not all the time do we really stop to wonder, how am I able to do this? And that's okay. We don't necessarily need to know. As we get deeper and deeper into transformation and wanting to understand NLP better and to take your practice to a new level. And when I say practice, I'm not saying necessarily that you're a coach and you have a coaching practice. I mean your own individual practice, how you apply the self-concept model to yourself. The more we go deeper into that, it is good to start understanding how this works. But I think it's more important that you spend time practicing it, because that's going to give you the 99%. And then once you hear the 1%, then you go, oh, okay, now I sort of understand how it all comes together. Now, what you're probably going to finish with here in a short time, because this is only for an hour, your understanding of how NLP works is probably going to be greater than even some teachers. Well, I would say greater than a lot of teachers, because most teachers I encounter don't really understand how NLP works. And most of you probably found me from my YouTube videos. The compliment that I get most often is, I was studying NLP and I couldn't understand what the teacher was talking about. So I went on YouTube and I found your videos, and listening to your videos made it all understandable for me. And so that's a great compliment. I still don't understand why someone continued to go and pay thousands of dollars to a teacher where they couldn't understand what they were talking about, and then going to my videos for free. It was like, why don't you just come to us and we'll take care of you? We'll explain how these things work and from the start. So what I started to understand about most NLP teachers is they don't really know how NLP works either. They just keep regurgitating what their teachers told them. And so what happens is you have this more robotic reciting of NLP. And when somebody asks them a deeper question, they can't really answer it because they don't really understand it. That was not satisfying for me. I needed to go deeper. I needed to understand it. Primarily because I felt like in order to be a real teacher, that I needed to understand it on a deeper level than an average practitioner. So as I was going through NLP trainings and going to like really advanced level trainings, you started having some of these teachers declare that they had the unifying field theory of NLP, of how it worked. And I was especially interested in that because the deeper I went into it, uh, it didn't seem to clear. It actually felt more random. It's like you got language patterns over here, you got submodalities over there, you got meta programs, and you just start to go, how does this all fit together? It feels like you're talking about multiple methodologies that don't have a very strong connection. They don't seem to be unified in anything. And one of them was Robert Dilts's SOAR model. He had a score pattern and then a SOAR model where he tries to bring all the elements of NLP together, and it just doesn't work. It just falls apart. It's not very useful. I tried it. Everything that I was taught, I tried repeatedly until either I realized there was nothing here, more here that I could make work, or the model just kind of fell apart before my eyes. And I was beginning to think that there wasn't such a thing until I met Steve. And he talked about scope and category, his theory of NLP. And so I said, well, where can I learn this? And he said, well, my books, Six Blind Elephants, volumes 1 and 2, that's pretty much my magnum opus of NLP in theoretical terms, but with practical applications and practical examples. And that pretty much is my explanation of how and why NLP works, but not just how and why NLP works, but how we function, how we make sense of the world around us, because that's essentially what NLP is supposed to do. So I picked up one of those books, and about 30 pages into it, I just went to Steve and I was like, what is this? And what is that? And what is this? And after a few questions, he said, you know what? I don't think you're ready for that yet. Put the book down. And I said, okay. So I put the book down. And it actually wasn't until later that he told me about the self-concept model, because he could tell by the questions that I was asking what I was looking for. And I often say this, it was good that at least one of us knew what I was looking for, because I did not. And it makes sense to me now looking back on it because of my background in philosophy and in non-duality and trying to merge philosophy with practical reality. The best philosophy I can think of that does that is Stoicism. But there's still not a lot of very practical techniques. It's more about good attitudes to apply to yourself. So I'm struggling to find out this thing about identity and how we create ourselves, and trying to understand this non-dual perspective. I spent a lot of time with a non-duality teacher, which again, not many techniques, not many practical applications, a lot of theory, a lot of philosophy, trying to apply it into the objective reality. So I started practicing the self-concept model, and again, I'm able to make it work. And I'm used to this at this point because I've been able to make a lot of NLP work for me. Yet this is more profound than anything I've ever experienced. I realize that we're talking, we're not just working with solving a problem, an individual problem in an individual context. Now we're talking about taking the generalizations that make up who you are and transforming those. And the effects are instantaneous and they're so far reaching. I had never experienced NLP on a level like this, where you could actually make transformation predictable. It was amazing. So I go to Steve and I'm telling him what I'm doing, and he's excited because he not only realizes someone he's telling to go try these things is actually making it work. He's also realizing that here is someone who's probably a good candidate for passing on what he's been doing, because he didn't have a protege. He didn't have a mentee. Not even Mark was really picking up his stuff. I knew self-concept before his son did. In fact, I'm the one who encouraged him to learn it. So after a while of doing this, I finally go back to Steve and I say, hey, I think I'm ready to learn. I think I'm ready to learn scope and category. Where should I start? And he just laughed and he was like, you've already been doing it. And I was like, what do you mean? He said, well, you've gotten really good at the self-concept model. That is a scope and category model. Every bit of it is based in that, and you're able to make it work. So you actually know scope and category better than you realize. And I was like, oh, okay. So where do I go now? And he said, well, go ahead and try the books now. And so I picked up the books and I started reading them. And sure enough, they started making more sense. And so what I find so much in personal development, but especially NLP, is people wanting to understand it on a theoretical level first. Because, and I think this is wise, because that's a lot of how we approach education in formal schooling as we're growing up. And I've also seen this the simple thing as like when I was teaching bartending. The way to learn bartending is to get behind the bar and mix the drinks. That's how you're going to get bartending. It's not only the drink recipes, which people think are far more important than what they are, because you maybe need to know about 10 at the most cocktails to mix. Everything else is more about how you do it, how you line up your glasses, how you pour, your efficiency, and doing that in your way, working your way around the bar. And when I taught at a bartending school, we actually had a fake bar with bottles behind you with colored water, so that you could get the feeling of actually, it was like a simulation of doing bartending. And it was amazing to me how people were so afraid to get behind the bar. They wanted to memorize everything first before ever getting behind the bar. And I couldn't understand this. I was like, no, you learn it behind the bar. You don't learn it by studying it. And I would even have people leave class early because they knew I was going to start drilling them, and they didn't want to do that. They were like, well, no, I need to go home and memorize all this stuff. And I was like, no, the best way to memorize is to actually do it. And then I could tell the people who were trying to pass the written test without having done the practice. It was obvious to me because they were getting things wrong that nobody who had actually poured a drink would ever get wrong. And so again, almost every case you will find learning anything, it's much better to get in there and start doing it and then learn as you go. So the traditional understanding, the traditional theory of NLP before we got to scope and category. The traditional theory is you have a desired state, and you have a present state and you have a desired state. The present state is the state of not having what I want. The desired state is getting to that place where I have what I want. Now, why do we call it present state and desired state? Why are we calling it a state? And again, this is what NLP was mainly focused on, was states. If you're in a resourceful state, then you should be able to access your potential. You should be able to accomplish what you want to accomplish. It's state-based. And it's always about being in a resourceful state. Now, this is a little primitive now, but it's important to understand where NLP came from. So when you get what you want, then that will put you in the desired state. So I'm in the present state where I want to be successful at something, and I'm not successful at it. The desired state is when I'm successful at it, what state does that put me in? Well, in order to succeed, I need to be in a resourceful state. So I'm in a state of resource, I'm in a resourceful state, and a state of fulfillment. I got what I want, right? So how do I get from present state to desired state? It's only a matter of inserting a resource or accessing a resource that I'm not currently accessing. Okay, this is very basic, very simple NLP. And some of you might be going, wait a minute, this isn't quite what you're teaching now. And that is true, because this is rather primitive. So, but it still holds up. There's still a lot of truth in it. So if I'm in the present state and I think about what it would be like to be in the desired state, I can compare the two and create an intervention around this. What is preventing me from getting to this desired state? Well, I know that I'm missing a resource or resources. Okay, I know that much. Well, what's stopping me from accessing that resource or resources? And this is where you get your NLP techniques, the switch pattern, 6-step reframing, all the classic NLP, even the meta model is how we would go about doing that. So I need to understand what I would have here that I don't have here, and then take that, put it in here, which puts me in that resourceful state. So I have more resources now, and I'm feeling more fulfilled and more whole, which is a much better place to go and approach accomplishing the thing that I want, instead of coming at it from a place of being in scarcity, trying to get to this state. And so again, I want you to think about it like when I say this to people, when I try to explain NLP, and they'll say, well, I don't I don't want the state of having lots of money. I want lots of money. And so the thing I need to get people to understand is, like, yes, I understand you do want the material possession or object or the achievement, but we need to understand what you think that will do for you when you have it. And if we can understand that, then we can build that inside of you. And so we still do this, and you might start to recognize this. We still do this to this day. We just do it in a much more detailed, complex way with the self-concept model. We start with, I want, right? That's not where we start with this training. And where we start with this training is understanding how you create qualities that are very certain. How did you do that to begin with? So we model that. And then in call 7, we get into, well, what is it that you want? And what you want is not as important as what you think that will do for you, what values you think you will fulfill in that process. Now, we go 10 steps, maybe 10 miles deeper than going into a state. And this was the problem I started to have with NLP. It was like, yeah, I can get myself to the state, but I can't stabilize it. I can get myself to the state, I can anchor myself or whatever, and then I go into the state, but then 3 seconds later, the state starts to leave me. So I don't want to be chasing states for the rest of my life and then, trying to hold on to them. I've done that before. It's rather painful. You always feel like things are slipping away from you. I want to be that state. I want to be those values as qualities of who I am. Now, I didn't know that until I started doing the self-concept model and started realizing that instead of wanting to get into a desired state, why don't I find out what values I'm trying to fulfill and then turn those values into certain and solid qualities of who I am? And when I do that, then I don't have to worry about trying to put myself into a state. I become that person. And when I become that person, I don't have to go like trying to move all of the objects around in my life to fit the life that I want to live. Kind of like, furniture, and that's how a lot of people are approaching getting what they want or being happy. They think if I can just organize the objects around me to be where I want them to be and how I want them to be, including money in the bank, the house that I want, the spouse that I want, the kind of vehicle that I want to drive. People think about all these things and they think if they could just have all those things, that's going to fulfill them. And we know that's not true, because it needs to be going on inside of you. Now, you can have all those things and be happy and fulfilled as well, as long as you realize that it's coming from within you instead of outside of you. Because if you think it's all dependent on all of these things outside of you, you're going to feel a lot of anxiety and insecurity, because at any moment, those things can be taken from you. What can't be taken from you is what you have inside. What can't be taken from you is your qualities, especially the ones that you value, that give you fulfillment. And so when I started transforming my values into certain and solid qualities of who I am, well, first of all, you realize that a lot of things you think you want, you don't actually want. You realize that these things are not going to really give you much. And because of that, it makes it easier to get. It's the paradox, right? The things that you are stressing yourself about trying to go at, desperately and from a state of scarcity, the more you go at them, the more that you seem to be pushing them away. And I did this for so long in my life, and it was so frustrating, and it brought me to depression twice. And then changing that paradigm, where I became the person rather than strived to get the object or the accomplishment, started making these things happen rather automatically. It's not, and I don't mean that in a way that I didn't have to work and that I didn't have to pursue, because I did. It's not like I just sat on the couch and my life started magically changing around me. That did not happen. But what had happened was when you become a successful person rather than striving to be a successful person, meaning you become a successful person because you generalize yourself that way, then you naturally do that. You naturally align to that, because to not do that would be to experience cognitive dissonance. That feeling you get when you act out of alignment with who you believe you are, your thoughts, your attitudes, your behavior, your normal behaviors. That's a very uncomfortable and unsettling experience. So when you believe you are the values as that you value as qualities of who you are, you naturally align to them, because it's more comfortable to do that than the uncomfortableness of not being that. So going from classical NLP to what we do in self-concept is, like I said, it's much more complex. It's much deeper. It's lasting. I don't even say it's more lasting. It is lasting. That's what lasting is. When you generalize something to be a certain way, you live your life selecting and collecting information, experiences to support that cognitive bias. You're going to have cognitive biases. You might as well make them work for you. You might as well make them serve you. And so that's what we do. And we do it based on real information, right? We don't go and, except for future pacing, we take real information, that experiences that happen in your life, and we recode them. We recode them in such a way that you pay more attention to those, because when you pay more attention to those, then that's going to drive you toward that. If you pay more attention to your problems and all the mistakes you've ever made in your life, the tendency is to keep repeating that, because that is your example. That is the light. That is the pathway you're shining the light on. So we started with classical NLP with this idea of a map of reality. That's what they used to call it. What is your map of reality? If your map of reality is lacking choice, lacking resources, lacking reference experiences, then you're gonna struggle. But if you enrich your map of reality by adding resources, adding choices, making sure it's accurate, you don't want to be inaccurate about your map of reality, but you're not after ultimate accuracy. You'll never have. That's what was the original goal of NLP. Well, Steve took it and said, okay, well, let's expand this, and let's go to identity. And let's go to something called scope and category. Now, the scope and category is extremely simple as a theory. The complexity comes when we start actualizing it, when we start putting it into practice. And so what I like to say about the self-concept model, which is probably the best example of a scope and category model, is that it is not difficult. It is not hard. It's just complex. There's a lot of details in it. And so that's why it's important to really follow the details. That will give you the understanding before you even have sort of the conscious understanding of how much you really understand about scope and category. So I don't know, everybody's probably on a different level of the self-concept model. So if you've been doing it for a while, scope and category is going to make a lot of sense to you. If you haven't been doing it and you're pretty new to this, it's okay. I'm planting a seed for you, and it's something to gradually get to. But what I don't want for you is for you to struggle and pressure yourself, or especially not beat yourself up for not understanding this. That is not the place where you want to start with this. Where you want to start in your journey, I think there is no better way than the way that I did, which is to just practice, practice, practice. And the more you practice, the more you will build up that understanding. It's like I was saying about Ashtanga yoga. What the interesting thing about Ashtanga yoga, the 99% practice and 1% theory, I would ask my first teacher, who was a world-renowned teacher, still is, I would ask her questions about the practice. And she would always have so much trouble answering them. And I remember thinking that was very strange at first. And then later, what I realized was she didn't contemplate these things in words. They were all movements for her. And she didn't need to. Her expression was through movement, not through words. And in some ways, I think for her, the words actually took away from the reality of the practice. And if you think about it, that's what words are. The convenience of words is to pass on communication, But when I say the word apple, an apple doesn't come flying out of my mouth, but you know what I'm talking about, because when I say it, you make that representation in your mind, so you know what I'm saying. And what happens to us after a while of sitting in sort of theoretical, especially academia, and I'm not dissing academia, there's definitely a place for it, is we start to lose that contact with reality. Everything is more a representation in our minds. We start to believe our beliefs over reality. We start to put more attention on the words rather than reality itself. The great thing about the Ashtanga yoga practice is it brings you back to reality. It grounds you back in that reality. And that's what mindfulness does as well. It's saying, okay, get out of your monkey mind, which is just, going off in all different directions that are all quite theoretical and conceptual. And let's get back to reality. Let's touch our fingertips. Let's look around and see colors. Let's, feel the ground under our feet. Let's feel the oxygen coming into our lungs. That brings us back to grounded reality. So scope and category. Scope is all that's being represented. So we can look at this in two different ways, the external and the internal. So scope is all that I can see, hear, and touch, all that I can access with my five senses right now. Okay. Now, some people might say, oh, well, then what you're saying is scope is objective reality. No, I'm not saying that. In order for you to access objective reality, which we can never do, means that you would have to be accessing all information all the time. And first of all, there is information beyond what our five senses can even detect, right? There are colors that we cannot see. There are sounds we cannot hear, but we know that they're happening because we have instruments that can record them. So you are not witnessing objective reality. Not only that, all your senses are even more limited than that. That, like, I can't see everything in this room right now. I can only see what's in front of me, but everything else still exists. And I can hear things outside that I can't see right now. There's birds chirping. I can't see that, but I can hear that. So I'm still missing pieces of this objective reality. This scope that I am witnessing right now externally, I am limited to what I can access. All right. I do have some choice about it. I can go outside and find that bird and watch it, right? I can move around. I can look around. I can, listen to different things. You're listening to my voice right now, but there are other sounds going on by you. And if you tuned out my voice, you would hear other sounds that you're not currently paying attention to. So we have some agency here based on what we want to focus on, right? But your scope is limited. It always will be. And because it's limited, you cannot access objective reality. It's always being passed through your filters. And then once it gets passed through your filters, the next thing that you do is you make meaning of it. That's the category. You categorize that's how you're making meaning of it. You're taking that information and you're selecting and collecting it. And how you do that is going to be dependent on many, many factors of what is meaningful to you and what is not meaningful to you. So some people might say, well, okay, Damon, you have this information coming in, and what if it's meaningless? Then what you're saying is incorrect. It would have to be incorrect. And no, when you apply the word meaningless to something, you're giving it meaning. You're saying it has no meaning, and I'm not going to pay attention to it. Now, that same bit of information might have meaning for someone else. So you don't get to determine ultimately, objectively, what has meaning and what doesn't. It just doesn't have meaning to you. And the fact that you're able to label it that way is, in fact, a categorization. You're giving it a meaning. So it either nothing has meaning or it all has meaning. And we are meaning-making machines, and that is what we do. Okay. So information comes in, we select and collect. Is the information important? Yes. Okay, then of what importance is it? Another way of saying of what importance is it is of what value is it? Is it contributing to my happiness? If so, it gets categorized under that label of happiness, and it goes in the bucket with all the other happy experiences. If it's a bad or negative experience, then I'm going to categorize that information that way. So we're constantly taking in information, we're constantly collecting that information and selecting, meaning what goes where. And the information that seems meaningless to us, we file as we don't need this. It doesn't go away, but we put it somewhere else where we say we don't need this. Because we've all had the experience of a memory popping up that we had forgotten it. It was there and it came out, and you go, oh, wow, where's that coming from? I haven't remembered this in a very long time. So those are the external scope. Whatever information I'm paying attention to with my five senses, and even information that I'm not paying attention to consciously, because your unconscious is also picking up information as well. Now, the internal scope is our internal representations. When, what was the word that I said? Apple. When I say apple, okay, again, an apple didn't fly out of my mouth, so you are not getting external, you're not getting an external representation, you're not getting an external scope of apple. You have a representation in your mind, okay? And everybody's a little bit different. So most of you, I'm sure, saw an apple. I doubt any of you heard an apple, because an apple doesn't make sound on its own. But if you're very, very auditory, maybe you heard the sound of biting into an apple, which has a very distinct sound. Okay, I didn't say eat an apple, but if I said apple and you're very auditory, maybe you fell on that sound. It's possible. Some of you might have tasted it. If you're very gustatory and you like apples, and I say the word apple, you get the taste on your tongue, and that would be considered part of the representation. Now, most of us are quite visual, but not all of us, and our representations tend to be more than just visual. And it really depends on the complexity of the representation. But something simple like apple, what did you see in your mind? Did you see a red apple? Did you see a green apple? Did you see an apple that you have actually seen before? Or is it a sort of a prototypical apple that you put together in your mind that represents apples based on all of the apples you've seen? This is what we call a summary representation, right? And still leaves it open to other possible apples that you might see that might look different than any other apple you've seen, but you will still, that will enable you to still recognize that you're seeing an apple. So that is a scope. When you hear the word apple, you access a representation within your mind. That is a scope. And all the parts of it are considered scope. What you see, what you hear, what you touch, all these sensations. And in the case of an apple, there might be taste. I doubt there's smell, because apples don't really smell. But however, whatever information you're using to represent that is the scope. Now I want to take this one more step. The other aspect of scope that is not only just important, it's like the most important thing, and that is the way that it is structured. The structure is really what tells you how to feel about the representation. So what you see, hear, feel, taste, smell, we can say is content, okay? I don't know how you represented it in your mind, but what I do know is that you represented an apple, okay? How you do that, the content, is going to be different from person to person. And actually, I'm not all that interested in that part. As a coach, as a teacher, for my own work that I do in myself, that's not as important as we think. For example, if you've ever, well, I use this analogy a lot. So if I could come up with one that is better, I would do it. When a person's depressed and you're trying to cheer them up by telling them or giving them examples of all the good things in their life, what happens? Does it help them? No. Why? Because you're taking a scope and you're banging it up against their scope and trying to convince them to replace their scope with this scope, okay? And I'm sure if they felt like they had the power to do that, they would. But we know in general, trying to force something, trying to push something, trying to overtly persuade like that usually doesn't work very well. So a depressed person has a scope based in content that is probably, the things that didn't work out in their life, or suffering in the world, the things that that person doesn't have control over but makes them sad, right? The content is probably composed of that. But we all have that, and not all of us are depressed. We all have a sense of compassion for the suffering going on in the world that we can't control. We all have had our negative experiences in life, the things that didn't work out, but we're not all depressed. Well, why? It's the structure, how you're structuring that content, that is causing you to fixate on it or not fixate on it. It's the structure that gives it the meaning. Is this important? Is this important for me right now? The content doesn't tell you that. The structure of the content tells you that. Okay. So we're still in scope. Scope is all the component parts that make up the content, and you cannot have content without structure. That apple that I mentioned, that apple is going to have a size to it in your mind. How big do you see that apple? The size of that apple is part of the structure. If you saw a little tiny apple that was so small that it was difficult for you to even see in your mind's eye, then you would start to struggle. And then also it would probably give you some other feelings, like apples are really insignificant, right? So the size of the apple is going to determine how you feel about it more than the apple itself. And the size of it would be structure. The color is also both content and structure. If I say the color is red, now I'm talking about content. But if I say, is there color or is there no color? Now I'm asking a structure question. So if the apple showed up in your mind as red, then I could say, well, what happens when you turn it green? Now, for some of you, that actually will affect the way that you feel about the apple. For some of you, it won't. Not all structural changes work the same way for everybody. Now, if I say, take the red or green apple that you see in your mind and fade out all of the colors, like bleach it out so all you see is an outline of an apple, you can notice that that makes you feel differently about the apple. And maybe not terribly so. It might just be as simple as, doesn't look as interesting. That might be all it is. So changing content can have an effect on how you feel, but only as it relates to when you change the content, how does it change the structure? It is easier to change structure than it is to change content. And the example I gave about someone who's depressed is a good example of that. If I try to cheer you up by telling you what's good about your life, I'm going at it with content. I'm trying to get you to change your content to the content that I'm telling you. Hey, don't think about those things. Don't think about that content. Think about this content. And the depressed person might try, and they will fail because they're not changing the structure. It's very hard to change focused on content. And a good example of a therapy that works this way is the traditional psychoanalysis, the Freudian kind, where you lie on your back and you just talk for hours, for days, for years. And then eventually, something comes out of that, hopefully. But that's why it takes so long, because the strategy there is to focus on content. But if we flip that script and we go straight to structure, there's usually a lot less resistance. And even if there is resistance, we smoke it out really fast and find out, well, what is the positive intention of that resistance and integrate it into what we're doing. So if we change structure, typically less resistance, and it's very fast. And that's what NLP has been based on. And this is why it has the reputation for working very quickly, because we're not going to try to walk through content. We're not going to try to push content up a hill or off of a cliff. We're just going to change the structure. So for example, if someone was depressed, and by the way, I don't treat depressed people, I'm not a licensed therapist, but as a person who has been depressed twice in my life, and the last time I was depressed was like 14 years ago. Basically, when I started doing NLP, that was what I needed to understand how to never be depressed again. And that is to take, how am I creating the depression? And this is typical classical NLP. How am I doing what I'm doing? And how do I know? Like, how do I know I'm depressed? Okay, well, I'm getting all these images right here of all the things that have not worked out in my life. And what do I know about this space right here? Well, what I didn't know when I was depressed, but I know now, is that right here creates a lot of certainty for me. And the images are about this big. This is my databases. They're all right here and they're sequential. When I put information here, I pay more attention to it. And it feels very certain when I do that. And the images are in color and they're disassociated. And if I spend any time on them, I'll naturally associate. They get bigger and I move toward them and I'm inside of it. And I don't get much auditory, but I get some. Okay. If I put content there, I'm going to start to feel very certain about that. So if I took all of my problems and put them there, depression, I can guarantee you. Because it's this structure, and I don't know why, but it's this structure that gives me that feeling. This is something I need to pay attention to because this is what is certain in my life. But if I put very positive information there, if I put the examples in my life of me doing what I want to do, succeeding at it, working through obstacles, solving problems, that's what I'm going to pay attention to. And it's going to give me a feeling of like, yeah, I might not have the answers right now, but as I work towards something, I'm going to figure this out. This is category. Okay. I look at the information, I see the structure, and it's not just seeing, it's hearing, it's all of the senses. And this tells me how to categorize it. So I categorize it as this is me doing what I want to do. This is me being the me that makes me happy. This is me being fulfilled Damon, not instead of depressed Damon. Scope, category. So whatever information you're paying attention to, whether that's external or internal, that is the scope. How you feel about that is the category. It is the way that you're making meaning of it. It's the way that you generalize that information. That's what we call category. Most of personal development is focused on changing the category, which is why it fails most of the time. Because you can't change the category directly. And this is, again, in self-concept, your self-concept, however that is constructed, whatever information you pay attention to, we chunk that down into qualities, smaller generalizations, that is scope. Your self-esteem is category. How do I feel about that? What does all this information make me feel, believe, generalize, categorize, whatever it makes me believe? That's the category. Scope, category. If I showed you a bunch of pictures of sad things, that's the sad is the category. But if I just showed you a bunch of pictures that most people think of as sad, some pictures of people experiencing pain, your categorization of that is that it's going to be sad. It's probably going to make you feel that way too. If I switch out those pictures with pictures of people having fun and playing and being happy, now you're categorizing that differently. So when you experience feelings, most people think that they just experience feelings randomly. And I know what this feels like because I used to be a very moody person who could be having a good time and suddenly out of nowhere I'm sad or I'm depressed and I can't figure out why this just happened. It was the information my unconscious was paying attention to. And because I wasn't consciously aware of that, the feeling arose and it seemed to come out of nowhere. And the feeling is often what we become conscious of. Just like when in an intuition or an insight, we don't know how we arrived at the insight of the intuition because that processing was all unconscious. The insight pops up, the feeling, the intuition, whatever you want to call it, and you're suddenly conscious of that, and you go, oh, that seemed to come out of nowhere. And unfortunately, some people say, well, that must be divine. And then they add all kind of self-importance to that, and that will cause you to make a lot of mistakes if you think that your intuitions and insights are divine. They feel good, they feel kind of miraculous, and that's why we tend to do that. But what you can do when you arrive at an intuition is to walk back the steps. How did I get here? Invite that information from your unconscious to come forward, and you'll find it. It's like even just using words. See, I was using a word. I was like, I don't usually use that word. Where did that word come from? And I realized that I just watched a YouTube video where somebody had used that word a lot, and it just got into my unconscious. And then next thing you know, I'm consciously using it. Now, if I didn't realize that, I could say, well, oh, I just happen to be using this brilliant word for these things and just apply all of that self-importance to myself. And it's like, no, no, no. These things get into your unconscious and then they eventually come into your consciousness. So what you're paying attention to, and it's usually unconscious, is the scope. Then you get a feeling, a category, a belief, a meaning, and that's what usually becomes conscious. And because you didn't know where it came from, you don't know how to change it. And that's why when I was depressed, I didn't know how to change it. I didn't know where it was coming from. It's like, I just feel bad and I don't know why. And that's the hopelessness that a lot of people who are depressed experience. And it's terrifying. But you know different. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else. So just in general, changing structure is much easier. And it is the way to go. You want to change structure, not try to change content, or not try to change the way that you feel about it. And this is why I don't believe in affirmations. This is why, this idea of, okay, well, if self-esteem is the problem, then let's go change the self-esteem. And what people often do is they do affirmations, or they try to build up their self-esteem, try to build up their confidence without any structure or anything, structured content there for that to ground that feeling, to have your scope that then you then categorize yourself as competent and confident and whatever you like about yourself. So people try to build themselves up by going at self-esteem and confidence directly, and they try to convince themselves of it. And then they walk out into the real world and they have a rude awakening that, okay, I don't feel confident. I don't like myself. That person just said something mean to me because I don't have a structure or anything resilient, any scope to ground that or to absorb that and say, okay, yeah, maybe that in the moment I was not such a good person or whatever, but overall, the entirety of my life, I know that I am good, but I just make mistakes. If you have a rich scope of who you are to fall back on, when you get criticism, you don't feel threatened because you have access to this enormous scope of what a good person you are, and you have done many wonderful things in your life. So you get that information, you go, is it useful or not? Yeah, okay, then I'm going to incorporate it. If it's not useful and somebody's just trying to be mean to me, doesn't bother me, it's their problem, right? I got too much going on for myself. But if you don't have that there, and you try to build yourself up with telling yourself compliments and I'm so confident and and all that, and then there's no structure there to hold it in place, it'll be destroyed very quickly. And that doesn't feel good. And I know from lots of experience of trying that. So scope and category is really, and it's the thing about scope and category, it's not even just limited to NLP or to self-concept work. It's how we experience reality. We're constantly making meaning of our reality. We need to, in order to carry on, in order to find some sense of purpose in life. And that is always going to be dictated by the scope. What scopes are you paying attention to? And those, if we get further into that, it's how that is structured that ultimately will dictate what meanings you make. And most people don't see that because it is counterintuitive, right? We tend to put a lot more attention on the scope, on the content. And movies are a great example. You go watch a movie and you like it, and you think about what the actors said and how they acted, and that, you pay attention to that. But what's really going on is a structure, and it's often the hero's journey. And they've been able to extract this structure from great stories. A beginning, and middle, and an end. That's the first sort of vague bit of structure. And in the beginning, what do you see? You see the main character's life as normal. And then at the threshold into the second act, the middle part, is there's a call to action. The hero must make a choice. Do they disrupt their lives, their normal lives, to go and achieve something, or to help somebody, or to rescue whatever? And when they make that choice, the call to action, to the journey, it brings them into the second act, which is now, okay, I've got to figure this thing out. I'm committed to it. I'm going for it. And then at the threshold of between the second and the third act is what I want or what the hero wants can't happen. He fails, she fails. This is impossible. And then in the acceptance of that impossibility, a new possibility emerges. And now we get into the third act, which is the climax and the resolution. When you watch movies, that you're not thinking about that. You're just enjoying the movie. And what's conscious to you is the content. Like I said, what the actors are saying, what the actors are doing, your sense of the story. That's what you're paying attention to. You're not paying attention to the structure unless you're a weirdo like me who went to film school and studied structure until I couldn't not see it. And so when I go see movies now, I annoy everybody because I want to walk out of the theater because I know what the magic trick is, right? If you know what the magic trick is, it's not interesting to you anymore. So that's another good one. Magic. Magician. It's probably on my mind because I'm reading one of Darren Brown's books. The magician is getting you to pay attention to certain scopes while they do the other stuff that you're not paying attention to, which is required to then shock you and jar you and make it look like they defied physics and reality, right? So you're paying attention to certain content, certain scopes, but there's something else going on in the background. And that's what gives you the experience that you experience. Something unexpected, something that seems to defy reality. And another example I'll give real quick, and then I'll open it up to questions. I've been using this one lately. It kind of popped out, and I was like, oh, this is good. So there's movie previews on YouTube. They're re-edited movie previews to take movies and turn them into something extremely different. So one of my favorite is The Shining, which is a horror movie made by Stanley Kubrick. And it's a pretty intense horror movie. It's also based on one of Stephen King's books. Made in the 70s with Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall. And what you can go find this on YouTube. Somebody re-edited the movie preview to make it look like a comedy. Not a comedy, more like a feel-good movie for the family. All right. Now, so this is a perfect example because they didn't go and reshoot anything. All the content is the same. Nothing has changed. The only thing that changes, that you could argue as content, but I could also argue as structure as well, was the music. They put a song from Peter Gabriel's Salisbury Hill. And what is music? It's a different rhythm. It's a different pace. It makes you feel differently based on the structure, right? A horror movie music sounds very different than feel-good music, and it has a lot to do with the structure. You could argue some content there. I'll give you that. But in general, almost no content has been changed in the sense of it being replaced. It's only been restructured. So when you watch the movie preview now, it's hilarious because if you've seen the movie, you know it's a horror movie, and now they're making it this family feel-good movie. Why am I feeling that? It's not the content, it's the structure. Because the content didn't change, except for the only parts of the content that changed was the structure itself. Now, one time I showed this to a group of people, and they were laughing hysterically at it because they had seen the movie, and they know it's a horror movie, and now it's like turned into this feel-good movie for the whole family. And one person wasn't laughing, and I went over to her and I was like, "You don't think this is funny?" And she goes, "What's funny about it?" And I said, "This is a horror movie." And she goes, "Oh, The Shining is a horror movie?" And I was like, yeah. So she was completely convinced that this was, in fact, a feel-good movie for the whole family that was made in the 1970s with Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall. She had no idea it was a horror movie. So again, the scope communicated to her by structure, this is a feel-good movie for the family, when in fact it was a horror movie. So if you change the structure of the content, it changes the way you think and feel about it. It changes how you categorize it, right? This is an enormous discussion that could go on for hours and hours and hours, if not days. So I'm going to stop it right here and start answering some questions. And you can really get lost in this. So I don't want you to do that though. The way that you're going to learn this best is by practicing a scope and category model, like the self-concept model. And then little by little, what I'm telling you here or what you might read from Steve is going to make a lot more sense. All right. Let's see, Mary Ellen, I think. Oh wait, actually we've got some questions. Can we think of scope as differentiation in perception? You'd have to tell me a little bit more what you mean by that, or even give me an example of what you mean by that. Because perception itself, you could say, well, that's the way you perceive something, which if you say it like that, then you're talking about category. If you say perception as in what are my five senses able to perceive, now we're more in the realm of scope. So differentiation and perception. I don't know if you're still here. Is this Ernesto? You still here, Ernesto? You wanna give me more detail of what you mean?
No, the idea is that, so when we're talking about a scope, it's things that it can differentiate. It's different scopes. Yes, without putting meaning, differentiation in my perception, what I can see or feel or hear. So different things make different scopes.
If you're saying scope is all that you perceive before making any meaning or category of it, then yes. A scope is what you perceive. The information that is either coming from external, like what am I in real life looking around and seeing, or what representations I have in my mind. That would be, yeah, whatever I'm perceiving would be the scope. Then when I make a meaning about that, and I categorize it, that information in some way, give it meaning, purpose, or even belief, generalization, that's the category part of it. Yeah. All right, let's see here. What is a bit confusing to me is that under structure and content seem to be the same heading. So if I understand correctly, how to differentiate between scope or category is the meaning I give specifically each piece of content. Well, yes, I'm not sure what you mean by each piece of content, because you can have multiple content. What's that?
It's structure or content. I'm trying to distinguish between them and structure and S is structure, not scope.
I'm sorry, say that again.
S is structure, not scope. So how to differentiate between scope and content is structure is the meaning I give specifically to whatever content.
Okay, so let's say, okay, there's scope, and in the scope, what differentiates scope from category is just the raw information before I make any meaning of it, right? That's like before I see someone and before I judge them, which we do very quickly and very often, it's just what I'm seeing. And if they're talking, it's what I'm hearing, right? Now, that inevitably is going to have a structure to it, because you can't have content without structure and you can't have structure without content, right? So it's there. And then the structural elements would be, first of all, is it something I'm seeing, something I'm hearing? So the modalities are a structure, not what I'm seeing, but the fact that I'm seeing it is part of the scope, right? Is it visually represented? Is it auditorially represented? So that is this part of the structure. What I'm seeing would be the content. The fact that I'm seeing it is the structure. Is that what we're talking about here, or what you're asking about?
I wish I knew.
Okay, so
but yeah, do you have a diagram that you've ever done, Damon, that represents this on visually and as a kind of goes part of this is part of that? Have you ever done anything?
A great place to look is the process elements of the self-concept model. So you have the process elements, you have the aspects of time and the aspects of content. The process elements are all structure, right? Where am I seeing, or where am I accessing? Where location is part of the structure? Where am I accessing this information? So that's structure. Am I associated or am I disassociated? Again, that's structure. Submodalities are structure.
Yeah.
Do I access them all at once or one at a time? Again, these are all structure-based questions.
Okay.
Yeah. So also, I think about these things a lot in terms of videos, because I make a lot of videos and I edit a lot of videos as well. And one thing you will recognize if you ever do this is how much you can change the meaning of a video just by changing the edit. And so editing is a form of structure. How long do I stay on a shot? Do I make the next shot black and white or color? You know, these are all things that are going to affect the way that we feel about it. And it's pure structure. I can take all the same content and make something very sentimental, or I can turn it into an action movie, or I can turn, you know, and all just based on the editing. So editing in that sense is all structure based.
Okay.
And we're constantly editing all the information that we're taking in. So we're structuring it as we're taking it in. And that structure tells us what to think about it. And a lot of this is just based in our cognitive biases. As information comes in, it immediately gets the structure that connects with and confirms our cognitive biases, because if it didn't, we get that unpleasant cognitive dissonance feeling. I know I'm kind of going off into that rabbit hole again, so I'll try to pull back. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Light bulb, this is exactly what I needed today. Good. So gaslighting is a form of restructuring. Well, yes, that's actually I have someone in my life, unfortunately, that I can't get rid of, who does a lot of gaslighting. And what she does is she restructures history. She will say, well, you did this and this is how it happened, and that, and she does it so subtly that you oftentimes kind of let it go. It's not sort of in your face. She's not telling me, no, that didn't happen, it happened this way. She's just like, she's putting things that, yes, did happen, but she's structuring it in such a way that makes me really look bad. And then a lot of times I'll kind of walk away from it and be like, wait a minute, that's not how it happened. And then I'll go back and say, no, that's not how it happened. So in that regard, yes, gaslighting is a way of trying to restructure things that actually happened and then say, well, this is how it happened. That's more of a passive aggressive way. But some people are, especially like narcissists, are very overt about it, right? They'll the very thing that they just did, they will say, no, I didn't, you did that. And then you're like, what? Like, it's the strangest thing how a person can do that. But yeah, so that would be restructuring. How do we redirect people when they get into content without being dismissive? That's a great question. Very, very good question. That is a bit of a skill and an art of NLP. And I wish I had just a quick and easy answer for that. But just the fact that you're asking that question means you're on the right path. I will say that, because it sounds like you've done some work and you're continuing to do that work and you're looking for good answers on that. So what I will tell people is I will interrupt them if they're getting too much into content. And I'll say, listen, you know, I understand that this is important to you. What's important to me is that I get you what you want, that I help you get there as fast as possible. And in order to do that, we need to not go down that path. And I need to get you to refocus over here. So it's that's like a very overt way to do it. And some people respond very well to that. I would say the majority of people will respond very well to that. Some people don't. I'm coaching a guy right now who does it, and I have to subtly bring him back. And so how I subtly bring him back is just by asking questions that point to structure. And I know it's a very vague answer, and I know you're looking for something more specific than that, but it's hard to say. I will tell you, the meta model is great for that. The meta model is really good for getting people to pay attention to structure. And that's not really the purpose of the meta model. The purpose of the meta model is to get them to access information that's different, but they're all structure-based questions. So when you really get good at the meta model, which I recommend every person who wants to be a coach should do, and it's really good for debate, by the way, it's a way of turning the person's attention to the things that you want them to pay attention to. And it also reconnects them with scope. That's one of the great things about the meta model. It reconnects them with scope. They have to go find the information and sensory-based information rather than relying on generalities category. So that is the function of the meta model, is to break you out of category, to bring you back to structure so that we can restructure so that you categorize differently. The Milton model is exactly the opposite. The Milton model pushes you into generalities, category, so that you then take other things that are going on in your life, like problems or whatever, and give it new meanings. Both are valid. I tend to favor the meta model, though. I think I'm a little more in alignment with the philosophy of Fritz Perls, which is we need to wake people up from their trances rather than put them into trances. But if you go to Milton Erickson, he would have said the opposite. I'm not going to argue. I'm just going to go with what works in the moment, what I think is best in the moment. Let's see. Self-concept checklist is scope. The questions like, what will that do for you? What's important about that to you are examples of category. Yes, you're asking for categories. You're asking for higher and higher categories when you ask questions like that, which kind of contradicts what I just said, that it tends to be very hypnotic. It tends to be hypnotic when you have people going into higher and higher levels of category, which is what values are, and really high level values. You've heard me use those terms, high level values and low level values, right? Well, the higher the level means the more general the category, the bigger the category, the more meaningful the category. Now we can ask criteria questions, which then brings them back to scope. So the criteria questions would be, oh, you know, happiness is important to you. How do you know it when you're happy? That's a category question that brings them, I mean, that's a criteria question that brings them back to scope. All right, Shilja, did that answer your question, or do you want to come on? I see your hand is still raised.
Hello, Devan, thanks for the explanation. I want to ask, what I could understand is scope is something like free-flowing information. But categories like when you get attached to a particular thought and you have some impact, like how do you feel, what do you see, etc. So that is kind of category. Am I getting it right?
So when you're asking for what do you see and what do you feel, you're getting the person to focus on scope when you ask questions like that.
Okay.
Well, how do you feel about it? It depends on how you're asking that question. So if you're asking someone how they feel about it, the tendency there is you're asking for category, like the kinesthetic, evaluative, and kinesthetic emotional. Emotions are categories. Scope is how do I feel about it, like in a tactile sense or proprioceptive sense. So kinesthetic perceptual would be scope. Kinesthetic, evaluative, and emotional would be category.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So if you're asking about what they see, what they hear, what they can touch, you're asking them scope. You're asking them to access the scope. And however that is structured is the clues you need to understand why they're categorizing it, evaluating it, generalizing it, whatever, the way that they're doing that. All right, any other questions? Let's see, Chad says, so in integrating counterexamples, we are working with scope, changing the structure to we feel different about them. But when transforming counterexamples, we're helping the person change the way they categorize an experience by changing the movie so that it can be categorized differently. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly right. What's amazing about transforming counterexamples is before we do that, when we've made a mistake, we feel like we're stuck. I did this thing, and this means I'm an awful person, and we get stuck there, right? And then when we transform a counterexample, what are we doing? We're getting back to, well, what went unfulfilled? What was violated and what went unfulfilled? And it's usually the same thing, but not always. You know, you might have wanted love, so love went unfulfilled, but you violated compassion. You know, it could be something like that. But it could also be, I wanted love, that went unfulfilled, and I violated being a loving person because I was rude and because I was trying to get attention, something like that, right? What your mind needs is some sort of reconciliation. And so we go back to what was intended, you know, what was the value that went unfulfilled, what got violated, what did I need, what resource or resources was I not accessing, that needed to be there for me to fulfill this value, regardless of what other people were doing or saying. I can't change that. Plug all that in and see a version of this movie where I do fulfill my positive intention and I don't violate any of my values. And just being able to access that usually frees us from this. And it also gives you instructions of how to do it going forward if you're ever in a similar situation, so you don't repeat the mistake. So yeah, there's a restructuring. We do change content a lot of times, though, because we change the movie of what happened, so that you have to change content when you do that. But the main thing that we focus on is how to restructure this. How we restructure it is to go find out, what was I intending? What was I after? What resources were missing? And then when I plug all that in, that creates new content, right? So we use structure to create new content. Good questions, by the way, all of you. All right. Like I said, this is a huge discussion. And here's the thing. Even understanding this a little bit, you are so far ahead of NLP practitioners out there, and even NLP teachers. Most NLP teachers do not understand what I'm explaining here. And because they don't, this is why they're not able to teach NLP that well. I've been very blessed, very, very blessed to have good teachers, Steve being the most prominent one, who could explain this stuff to me so that I could understand it. But remember, the way he led me to this was to tell me to practice, to tell me to go learn this model, to do this model. And eventually, as a result of doing that, I started to understand this. So whenever it was time to put the 1% theory in place, I was ready, right? So what I want all of you to focus on is the 99%, so that when you're ready, this 1% will make sense to you and it will make a difference. It's hard to think of like 1% making a difference, but it does. It really does. Let's see, I'm doing Masterclass in 10 days. This is going to help me big time. Yeah, you're gonna soar probably past your classmates. Be prepared. Then you might get some people being really jealous of you. Let's see, lots of clarity things. So you're very welcome. You're very welcome. And then also with depending on who you're learning from, a lot of teachers impose content. They impose their biases on their students, and it's really unfortunate. But it's just a state of things, because most people don't understand content imposition. And again, the teachers have not been great. The first time I approached John Grinder, well, I say approached, it was an email. And John Grinder was one of the co-founders of NLP. He wanted to know who my teachers were. And right away, once I told him, this is before I met Steve, right away, he started bashing them. And I said, what is the problem? Like, why are you so angry at my teachers? And he said, because they have violated the critical principle of NLP, and that is to not impose content on your models and not impose content on your students, to not impose content on NLP, because NLP is structure, not content. And I did not understand that at the time. I just thought, man, this guy's crazy. I could almost hear him yelling through his emails. And then when I met Steve and I told him about that email conversation I had with John, and I said, can you help me understand this? In a very polite and easy way, he started to explain this to me, the difference between content and structure, and why you don't want to impose content. But unfortunately, most teachers do. It's all a process, and it's all a balance of understanding certain aspects of this at a time. And so sometimes you got to put down certain parts of it and go focus on other parts. But you're doing all the good stuff, and just reading your questions and hearing your questions, I can tell you're doing the work, so you're on the right path. We work as hard as we can to put you on that right path to make this easier and clearer for you.